Hello and welcome to Breaking Digital Podcast. I'm Doyle Bueller, and this is the only show that helps you better understand and pursue what matters most in your digital business and how to make a difference with your digital strategy through enhancing your digital leadership. I'm your host, and on the show I interview strategic thinkers from all fields around the world in hopes of answering the one important question: what real digital strategies actually work? Of course, there's no one size fits all, but the goal here is to help you decide which avenues can work best for you. In today's show, I'm talking with Joe Escobedo. He's known as the brand builder. He's recognized as one of the top 20 content marketers worldwide and is the director of content marketing for Happy Marketer out of Singapore. And we have a great conversation about personal branding, what affects personal branding, and some real core strategies to be able to develop a personal branding. And we have some great stories and some great case studies about that. All coming up on this episode of Breaking Digital Podcast.
Overwhelmed with online or just wanting to learn more about how you can build a successful business amidst all of the self-appointed gurus, big buzzwords and empty promises? The Breaking Digital Podcast by Doyle Bueller tells you exactly what smart entrepreneurs need to know to escape the clutter, get clear of the confusion, and pass the bullshit of building and growing a successful business online. It's about digital leadership and delivering the best value for your business online to your audience. Now, here's your host and author of the book on digital leadership and online marketing, The Digital Delusion, Doyle Bueller.
All right. Hello and welcome back. Today I'm with Joe Escobedo. He's known as the brand builder and is recognized as one of the top 20 content marketers worldwide. He's currently the director of content marketing for Happy Marketer, and he's joining me today from Singapore. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, thanks, Doyle. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for joining me. It's obviously a little ways away today.
A bit.
Yeah, cool. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Joe.
Sure. So I'm originally from the U.S., Oklahoma, but I've been living in Asia for about 10 years now. I was in China for about 5 years, heading up PR and branding for many multinational companies. For the past 5 years, I've been in Singapore here, consulting companies on their digital marketing and content marketing.
And were you doing sort of content marketing and PR in the U.S. as well before you moved?
So I was working at a venture capital firm in the U.S. Before I moved, and I was primarily doing market analysis. That was 11 odd years ago.
Yeah. Okay, so that's going a while back. And
yeah.
If you could compare sort of back then with today, how have things changed in those fields?
I mean, I think that the concept of content marketing wasn't really something that existed way back then.
Yeah.
But now I think it's kind of exploded, particularly in the US.
Yeah.
And I think it's making its way into Asia. A lot of companies are investing resources and manpower and budgets into content marketing. Not to the same extent as the US yet.
Yeah.
But it's still exciting space to see companies really seize the opportunities in content marketing.
So why do you think there's sort of a difference then in between the U.S. and in Asia?
I think in many ways in the marketing advertising space, the U.S. is still a couple of years ahead.
Yeah.
In terms of what's going on over there, what they're experimenting with, and I think that slowly trickles down into Asia.
Mm. And so then are you able to sort of take the concepts to your customers and to your clients of how content is being used?
So I look to some of the content marketing experts in the States for ideas and concepts and things like that. But I think that the Asian market is very different from the US, what people value, what drives people. That differs quite a lot. And so I think that you really have to adapt your content marketing strategies and tactics to the local market.
And how do you find it different? Like what is it about the Asian content marketing field that makes it different?
So I think that one of the biggest differences in that primarily the U.S. is one major market. I mean, granted, there's local um, kind of nuances, but for the most part, it's one key market. In Asia, you're looking at many different markets, each with different languages, each with different levels in terms of their economic status, in terms of their consumption habits. So I think that looking at that from a greater kind of regional scope um, is definitely much more challenging in Asia than it is in the US.
Because there's so many like smaller groups to market to? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of the regional headquarters for major multinationals are based out of Singapore. Um, Now, with that said, they're looking at a remit of maybe 10 to 15 countries. So obviously, you can't do a one size fits all kind of strategy for the region. So how do you, go about creating that overarching content marketing strategy and then help adapting that to each market? I think that's a big challenge that many multinational and brand marketers really struggle with.
Yeah, I suppose that actually makes sense. And that's perhaps why it's not necessarily behind the US, but it's just completely different because you have all these different factors involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so what are you finding are some of the strategies that work for this type of market?
So I think that in this market, people relate to other people. I think it's a concept I've used in some of my previous workshops. So instead of the kind of here's the company updates, I think what successful companies are doing are leveraging their personal stories, whether it being their CEO's kind of rags to riches story, how he built a company from scratch, if it's a startup, or kind of showcasing clients, partners, um, any personal stories. Because at the end of the day, products and services don't really differ much from company to company. I think the, the people is what makes a huge difference, and I think as a reader, as an audience, you relate to people in the same shoes as you. And I think that successful companies are really leveraging the power of kind of people centric stories.
Right. Yeah. So that's kind of where the concept of personal branding comes into play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of personal branding is kind of exploding here in Asia. Um, I've been fortunate to I think do over 10 interviews on the topic in the past couple months. So there's definitely a huge demand and interest in personal branding.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a couple kind of strategies that I've, you know, told clients or
Yeah.
other individuals about. The first step is essentially Google yourself. And I did this in a workshop recently.
Yeah.
I asked people to Google themselves, and I
Is it
said,
okay to
"Go
Google photos too, or just text?
ahead." Yeah, I mean, actually, that's a good point. Yeah, you should do both Google text and as well as images
Yeah.
because you want to be monitoring your brand across. Um, but I think what I asked a recent workshop group is I told them to Google themselves, and I said, okay, do you like or dislike what's showing up, on the first page of Google, or are you even showing up at all? Um, and about a third of them weren't even showing up. And I
Oh,
said,
really?
well, you're basically a ghost.
You're a digital ghost.
You're a digital ghost, exactly. And I was kind of reinforcing the point that nowadays many prospects or even hiring managers are going to Google. They're looking you up before they even call you for that interview or that sales meeting. Um, and so if you're not showing up, you're essentially missing out on these opportunities. Um, so yeah, it was just interesting to see. I think it was a wake up call for many of the people in the group.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. So what's after they've Googled themselves, what's a good next step then?
So for the next step, I generally recommend creating like a superhero name.
A
This
superhero
is
name?
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's essentially what you want to be known as
Like
or
Super
known for.
Doyle or
So so in my case, it's the brand builder.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and so I'll give you an example of the power of just this, 2 or 3 word, um, superhero name. So I met with a successful CEO recently. And before I even introduced myself, he said, "Hey, you're Joe. You do brand building, right?"
Yeah, yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, yeah,
How did you
of
know?
course, yeah." So it's one of those things where it creates a perception before you know in that
Yeah.
person's before they even meet you. So
Yeah. I've always had a hard time with that though. What do you suggest kind of how do you sort of isolate that and how do you what steps would you go through to sort of develop that hero name?
so for me, I think the big thing is the name should be how people perceive you. So this name was actually given to me by my colleagues.
Mm,
Yeah, so I was conducting a workshop and I asked the audience to team up and I said, look at each other's LinkedIn profiles and describe that other person in 2 or 3 words. And you can do the same exercise with your colleagues. You can ask them, what 2 or 3 things do I really excel at? And you use those keywords as kind of the basis to build your superhero name.
yeah.
And the thing with the name is I would keep it short and sweet, so maybe 2 or 3 words max. I see many people on LinkedIn having these long convoluted headlines,
Okay.
and it's very easy for people to forget those.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's 2 or 3 words, they're more likely it's going to stick in their head. So keep it short and sweet.
Okay. Well, that's good. Would you have any advice for me then?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look at your profile a bit more in detail, and I'll get back to you on that.
Okay. All right. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
All right. And then, so once they've sort of had their name emblazoned in terms of what they do and how they do it type thing, what comes next?
Okay. Next, you need to identify clearly who your audience is.
Yeah.
So if you're a job seeker, who's going to hire you? If you're a consultant or you're a company, um, who's going to be your prospects? So it could be a HR director, marketing director, CEO. You want to find out where they are online and offline,
Yeah.
whether it's industry trade shows, networking events, etc. I think that's where you need to be, and that's where your messaging needs to be. So that's the step in terms of determining your audience. And I think the biggest step is to get yourself out there.
Okay.
And that just involves sharing your insights and experiences. So that could include everything from writing, speaking, whatever you enjoy doing.
Yeah.
Now, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think many people are really, really scared to start publishing or speaking. So I recommend starting small. So in my case, I started publishing on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
which led me to publishing and publications. But at least you kind of build your craft there.
Right.
And then when it comes to like public speaking, so for me, I started at Toastmasters, which is an organization where you can practice your presentation skills. And I think that was kind of the game changer for me in terms of building my confidence and helping better express my ideas to an audience. So definitely start small. You don't have to, start writing for Forbes off the bat. I think that's a mistake that many, many people make is they want to go big very early.
Yeah. Well, is it better to write for Forbes or to be written about in Forbes?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I think there are some merits in both, to be honest. I think the advantage of writing for Forbes is it's more on a sustainable basis.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I write 5 pieces for them a month.
Yeah.
So I'm consistently getting my message and sharing value with my audience. Whereas I've done quite a lot of interviews, but those may be one-offs. So, unless you are pretty PR savvy or, you have a team pitching, securing those interviews, maybe a one-off, um, you know, awareness rather than a consistent one if you're writing for them.
Right. Do you find that you get a different response from when you're being interviewed than when you're like the writer? Like have you noticed any difference?
Yeah, I think for me, when I generally write about people, the people I write about will get, the bulk of the emails or LinkedIn requests and things like that. Whereas if I guess being an interview, it puts more of the spotlight on me.
Yeah.
So people may reach out to me more. But at the end of the day, I'm just trying to add value to my audience's life.
Yeah. Sorry, you mean they reach out more when you're the subject of the article or when you write about a subject?
So generally when I'm the subject
Okay.
of an article,
Yeah.
they'll reach out to me more.
I see. Okay. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, but I think that, like I said, that it happens in just waves, essentially.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm writing on a particular subject, then I'll get consistent, connection requests over a longer period.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a good point. So I'm curious, how do you become like that one of the top 20 content marketers worldwide? What do you have to sort of do to get there?
I think that so for me it was interesting because I had never pitched for any of these opportunities. But I think I'm very conscious in the keywords I use. So for example, I sprinkle in the word content marketing into my social media profiles.
Yeah.
One, it's because I do it. It's my day job. But I've noticed that after doing that, I started ranking for that keyword in specific markets. So I've done several expert roundup post interviews, or I've done several podcast interviews based on this topic because I'm very conscious in terms of using that keyword.
Yeah.
And also I write about it more as well. So you'll see me, if you follow me on LinkedIn, covering content marketing tips on a regular basis. So I think that the perception of the market is that, Joe's the go-to guy for content marketing. And so I think that's resulted in quite a lot of opportunities for me.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, no, that's good. But it obviously takes a lot of work.
Yeah, I think that's the big caveat. I want to just let everyone know that it doesn't come easy. It's quite a lot of work, and you have to be in it for the long haul.
Good point.
Because these results don't come immediately. And I'll share a couple of examples later. But I think that the most successful people I know have been doing this for years. You look at the Neil Patels of the world. So you look at the very Gary Vaynerchuk's.
Yeah.
They've just been doing it for so long and on a consistent basis, and now they're really at the top of their game. So I think that consistency is a huge part of building your personal brand.
Yeah, well, consistency in what you talk about, or in delivering the content, or both, or even more.
Honestly, it's both.
Yeah.
So in terms of delivery, you want to do it. You want to be publishing or sharing your thoughts on a regular basis. So for me, it's every day. For some people, it's once a week. But at least you're doing it on a regular basis where people know that they can expect some insights from you on a particular day.
Yeah.
And then in terms of topics, I recommend that people only stick to maybe 2 or 3 topics. They're really knowledgeable about, and really only talk about those. So for me, it's content marketing and personal branding. I try not to write about anything outside of that because it's easy for people to get confused if you're trying to cover too many topics at one time. So just stick to 2 to 3.
So do you mean topics like, could you maybe just explain that a little bit more?
Yeah.
What you mean by topics?
Yeah. So for example, I see many people, are posting on LinkedIn, and they're covering everything from, CSR, corporate social responsibility, to content marketing, to leadership, to HR tips, to just a variety of things where if I'm looking at them from an audience's perspective, I don't know what they do or what their kind of expertise is.
Yeah. Okay.
So
So
yeah,
so you
that's
should
where
see the expertise in the content that you share or write about or
absolutely,
create. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, and so, like I said, I think it really helps to narrow it down to two or three topics that you're kind of really a quote unquote expert in. You're knowledgeable, and you enjoy talking about.
And so do you recommend like uh producing like a content plan or a schedule or kind of anything to help organize your thoughts?
Yeah, so I created this kind of personal brand weekly planner, but it's essentially a system where you'd say, every Saturday you might read articles about your particular industry or your topic. Um, Sunday you might um, schedule or share kind of those topics. Monday you might reach out to relevant influencers who also cover those topics as well. So I think there are certain things you can do on a daily basis, and I can share the template with your audience later.
Yeah, that'd be
Um,
fantastic.
that you can do on a regular basis
Yeah.
to really, like I said, keep it consistent and keep it structured.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
And to
very,
to
very helpful.
give you some of that structure as well, which helps you focus the ideas.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Definitely.
Um, so in today's day and age, like we do see an awful lot of content, and you sort of highlighted a few of the ways to differentiate your content. What's going to happen to those people who don't sort of get the message and continue to sort of pollute the content ecosystem?
I mean, they're going to get lost. They're going to drown in a sea of content.
Yeah,
I mean, it's as simple as that. If your voice and your stories are not unique, like I said, chances are you're not going to rank for it. Chances are people are not going to, remember it. So I think that's goes back to what I was saying in terms of the utilizing people or personal stories. Um, and I'll give you an example. So every Forbes piece I write, I generally have a quote unquote hero.
hmm,
Okay. So that hero is someone that the audience can relate to. And in the piece, they share their successes and failures, as well as some practical tips that the audience can instantly use. I think the power in that is that story or that hero is only told in that piece or from that angle. So, like, for example, I could say, here are the top 20 content marketing trends for 2018. Great. What I prefer to do is say, okay, here is someone who's been, particularly successful in their content marketing. Um, Here's exactly what they've done. Here's how they got started. Essentially, what you're doing in your podcast. So tell these personal stories, their failure, successes, and it really helps you stand out from the crowd. And I found that people remember those far more than they do kind of the generic top 10 tips kind of articles.
yeah. Okay, no, that's a great idea. Yeah, making it more personal and talking about that story and how it relates.
Yeah, I think this goes back to even companies who are pitching. Um, I get a lot of pitches, and it's always the same thing. Like, here's our products, here's our services. I'm like, great, but what impact does it have on your kind of users? So if a company can share, just highlight me one person and say, okay, based on using our products and services, they've experienced X, Y, Z, or this is what um, this is how they benefited. So once again, I can relate to one person. I can't relate to a generic product or service. It just doesn't stick.
Yeah, has to be specific.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, cool. And so you mentioned a couple of people who are doing content, quite well, like Gary Vaynerchuk and a few others. Are there any other sort of case studies that, any other stories for that matter that sort of highlight how content can be done quite well?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my favorites is by named Dory Clark. Dory is a U.S. based writer, speaker, marketing consultant. And so Dory has been publishing articles for several odd years now. She's been featured in HBR, just really, really quality um, content. And then I think recently she launched an online course, and she was able to generate about $100,000 in 5 months, which
Excellent.
is
Yeah.
which is incredible.
Yeah.
And I think that's a testament to the strong personal brand she's built over the years, because people admire her, they respect her, and they want to buy from her. So yeah, it really showcases the power of a strong personal brand.
Excellent. And any ways that you feel that she could improve, like remarkably, I guess? Like, how do you take it to the next step?
That's a good question. I think she should be giving me that advice. But
Well, now's
I
your
think,
chance.
yeah, no, I think at the end of the day, it's about scalability as well. So she's doing the online courses, but how do you go beyond your current niche market or your current, geographic location?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the big challenge that many people struggle with when monetizing, building their personal brand.
Yeah, and that's an interesting concept of how do you scale your content, right?
Mm.
It's not obviously being just voluminous, creating more of it. It's you need to scale it perhaps in other channels and other avenues. What do you think?
Absolutely. I'm a big advocate of the less is more
Yeah, yeah,
in terms of content. So less content, but really, really valuable content, and
yeah,
just publishing that in more channels relevant to your audience. Because at the end of the day, you can create the best piece of content,
yeah.
but if no one reads it, if it doesn't get land with your audience, then it's pretty much a waste of time.
Yeah, no, for sure. But obviously spend the time to create some great content too that connects with your audience.
Absolutely. And I think you made a very good point. It has to connect to your audience.
Yeah.
So for me, all of my topics are based on challenges that my audience has. So I'm constantly speaking with people, meeting with people, or even posing questions to my LinkedIn audience and saying, okay, what's your biggest challenge around blank? And you'd be surprised that many people are quite vocal and kind of sharing what they're struggling with. And as a result, that kind of forms the basis of a lot of my topics or what I write or speak about.
No, fantastic. Excellent. Just sort of moving on to sort of to I guess close out the conversation, but what do you see coming next? And I know you said you won't do lists, but well, you can, of course. But what do you kind of see coming down the pipe in terms of personal branding and content development and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think in terms of personal branding, I'd really like to see more individuals monetize their brand. I think that many have done a good job in terms of growing their audience and providing valuable content on a consistent basis. But at the end of the day, we have many of us have families to feed and things like that, so we need to monetize the brand.
Yeah.
So in my case, I'm kind of following in the footsteps of Dory Clark, and I'll be launching some of my own online courses, personal branding, PR, and content marketing later this year. But I think it's just one of the many ways that I'd kind of like to kind of monetize my brand.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, looking at ways of getting your content out there, but monetizing it as well through courses and ebooks and what have you.
Yeah, you could do ebooks, workshops. I mean, there's a variety of different ways.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was reading an article just earlier today, and that's what he was saying is, I think it was in Inc. magazine. But yeah, it's like people are looking for that event side of things because it's actually a lot more effective ROI because you can only be digital for so far. And then you kind of need to connect with people. But anyways, that's not about content, but
No, I think it's a good point. I think you need to build that relationship both online and offline.
yeah.
So in my case, I do quite a lot of presentations and workshops now to kind of meet face to face a lot of my audience. So it's a good point.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. No, excellent. Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate your time.
Sorry, I'm not sure about that.
Oh, that's thank you, Alexa. Hey, maybe I should interview Alexa for my
Yeah, I was
for my
going to say
next
that'd be interesting one.
Oh, that's hilarious. She wasn't supposed to talk. I didn't even say Alexa. What the heck? Anyway, yeah, no, it's been fantastic, Joe. I really appreciate your time. How can we get in touch with you? How can we find you online?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, Joe Escobedo, or on Twitter at The Real Joe Escobedo.
The Real Joe Escobedo. Perfect.
Yes.
Excellent. And yeah, so we'll have all of the links and on the show notes as well on the website breaking.digital when we're all published and ready to go. So thank you once again, Joe. I really appreciate your time, and we will see you guys online. Thank you very much for listening to Breaking Digital, the podcast for smart entrepreneurs wanting to become true digital leaders in their industry and to own online. If you have any comments on the program, please feel free to connect on Twitter at Doyle Bueller with the hashtag #OwnOnline. I would really appreciate it if you could share this podcast with your network, as I'm sure they will get some value from it for building their successful business online as well. You can find the resources that we talked about, as well as the transcript and full podcast for download on thedigitaldelusion.com/podcast or on iTunes or on SoundCloud. I'm Doyle Bueller, and I will see you online.
Thank you for listening to Breaking Digital with Doyle Bueller. While he goes and makes a sandwich, you can find all of the notes, links, and details on this podcast by visiting thedigitaldelusion.com/podcast. Go on and click that now. www.thedigitaldelusion.com/podcast. I'll definitely click that. If you'd like a free copy of the book, The Digital Delusion, How to Overcome the Misguidance and Misinformation Online, just send an email to doyle@thedigitaldelusion.com. See you online.